She left. Not with a fight, not with a dramatic scene you could point to and say, that's why. She just withdrew. Slowly at first, then all at once. And one morning you woke up and realized the space next to you wasn't just empty, it had been empty for a while. You'd just been too close to see it. And now, weeks later, maybe months, she's back. Not fully, not with a speech or an apology, just a text, a comment, a memory she randomly thought of. Something small enough that you can't call it what it is, but large enough that you can't ignore it either. And you're sitting there wondering, why now? I know that question. I know it not just because I've studied human nature for decades, but because it's the oldest question in the oldest story. The moment someone walks away, something primal activates in the person left behind, and something equally primal activates in the person who walked. What I'm about to tell you is not what you've been told before. It's not give her space. It's not win her back with grand gestures. And it's definitely not she's testing you, pass the test. Those answers are built for people who want comfort. This conversation is built for people who want truth. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli sat in exile in a small farmhouse in Sant'Andrea in Percusina, stripped of his political position, humiliated, cast out by the very city he'd served, and he did what only the best minds do in failure. He studied it. He asked the question that no one around him was willing to ask. Why do people actually do what they do, not what they say they do, not what they think they do, but what they actually do when stakes are real? And what he found changed political philosophy forever. It also, and this is what matters right now, explains exactly what happened between you and her. Thomas Hobbes took Machiavelli's realism and built a framework around it in Leviathan. Jean-Jacques Rousseau pushed back on both of them in his Social Contract, and Max Weber, writing in the early 20th century, gave us the modern vocabulary for why authority collapses, why people stop choosing what they once chose. None of them were writing about relationships, but they might as well have been, because the mechanics of loss, desire, identity, and return, they don't change based on scale. They operate the same way in empires and in the quiet of your own apartment at midnight. Today, I'm going to walk you through it all, not as theory, as lived reality, with the names, the books, the historical evidence behind it, so you can hold it in your hands and know it's real. By the time we're done, you won't just understand why she came back, you'll understand something far more useful: who you need to become so that the pattern stops repeating. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. Everything I'm about to share is meant to help you understand these dynamics so you can recognize them, make conscious choices, and build something genuinely better. Not to give you tactics to use against another person. Understanding how something works is not the same as weaponizing it. We're here for the former. First, let me show you what's actually happening inside her psychology right now. Principle 1. She didn't suddenly value you. She suddenly felt the weight of losing you. And those are not the same thing. Here's what I mean. John Locke, in his 2 treatises of government, built his entire philosophy around a concept he called natural rights: life, liberty, and property. And the reason property matters so much in Locke's framework isn't greed, it's psychology. Locke understood that human beings only truly feel the value of something when they can feel its potential absence. When you have it, it's background. When it's threatened, it becomes visible. You had become background, constant, assumed. Not because you weren't valuable, because she never had to consider the possibility of losing you. You were always available, always responsive, always there. And in human psychology, this is ancient wiring, not a character flaw. What is always present fades from conscious awareness. The Roman historian Livy documented this dynamic in Ab Urbe Condita, his monumental history of Rome. He wrote about how Rome repeatedly neglected its loyal allies, not out of malice, but out of something more dangerous: assumption. The assumption that what has always been there will always be there. And when those allies finally withdrew, Rome didn't grow wiser. It panicked, it reached, it suddenly saw value it had ignored for decades. That pattern, it's not unique to empires, and recognizing it is the first step to breaking it. Principle 2. The attachment style she brought into your relationship was set long before you arrived. This is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, because the conversation most people have about why she left focuses entirely on what you did or didn't do. And while your behavior matters, and we'll get to that, it's only half the story. The other half started in a house you've never been inside. John Bowlby's attachment theory research, now foundational neuroscience, established something the Stoics and ancient philosophers intuited but couldn't clinically prove. The way we attach to romantic partners is largely a mirror of how we attach to caregivers as children. If that early attachment was anxious, inconsistent love, unpredictable warmth, she learned to read relationships through a lens of hypervigilance, always scanning for signs of abandonment. And here's the difficult irony. When she finds someone stable, someone consistent, someone safe, that stability can feel unfamiliar. Not because there's anything wrong with stability, but because her nervous system was calibrated on uncertainty, and familiar and safe don't feel like the same thing when the template was built in anxiety. Think about it this way. Aristotle argued in his Nicomachean Ethics that character is formed by habit. We become what we repeatedly do. Well, she repeatedly experienced love as something unpredictable, charged, anxiety-producing. That's what her nervous system learned to recognize as real. This isn't a condemnation of her, it's a map, and maps are useful, not for controlling the territory, but for understanding where you are. Here's what happened when she left. Her attachment system registered loss, and a nervous system conditioned on uncertainty and chase did what it was wired to do. It activated. The thing it had stopped noticing suddenly became visible again, not because she thought it through, not because she grew, because absence, for an anxiously attached nervous system, functions like a reset signal. Understanding this matters, but I want to be direct. This is not a lever to pull. Deliberately engineering loss to trigger that response is manipulation. What we're examining here is why the pattern exists, so you can recognize it, name it, and make a conscious choice about what to do next. That's a completely different thing. Say this with me. Her leaving was information, not verdict. Good. Hold that. Because here's where it gets worse. Not about her, but about the cycle itself.
You've been told she's coming back because she realized what she lost. That's a beautiful story. And it's only about 20% true. Principle 3. Reconciliation cycles are not driven by growth, they're driven by unresolved emotional patterns. Polybius, the Greek historian who documented the cycles of Roman political power, described what he called anacyclosis, the inevitable rotation of political systems from one form to another. Monarchy to aristocracy to democracy and back again. Not because each transition was chosen wisely, but because each system carries within it the seeds of its own collapse, which then regenerate the previous form. Relationships do this too. She left because something felt wrong, but something felt wrong was not a diagnosis, it was a symptom. The actual condition underneath, unresolved. And when the discomfort of staying is replaced by the discomfort of being without you, the cycle begins its next rotation. Without the internal work on both sides, re-entry usually means returning to the same dynamic with different expectations. That's not cynicism, that's just how unresolved patterns tend to operate. And here's where conventional wisdom fails you. Every well-meaning friend will say, "This is your chance, she's reaching out, respond." And the instinct to respond immediately, with warmth, with relief, with availability, is completely understandable. But here's the question worth sitting with before you respond. Who are you responding as? The man who reacts from relief, who immediately confirms that nothing has changed, or the man who responds from a place of genuine clarity about what he needs and what he's built in the time since? Those are not the same response, and she'll feel the difference before you finish the sentence. This isn't about withholding warmth as a tactic, It's about something more fundamental. Do you actually know what you want? Because if you don't, no response strategy will help you. And if you do, that clarity will communicate itself without any strategy at all. Principle 4. She may not be sending mixed signals. She may be sending one clear signal that's simply hard to hear. Carl Schmitt, the German political theorist who wrote The Concept of the Political, argued that all genuine decisions come down to clarity about what something actually is, stripped of the comfortable ambiguity we prefer. His point was that refusing to make that distinction, insisting on living in the gray, is itself a choice, and usually one that serves the person most comfortable with uncertainty. When someone re-enters your awareness with a text, a like, a "how are you?" the signal may not be "I'm ready to recommit." It may simply be "I'm uncomfortable with the silence, and you were the easiest person to reach toward." Both things can be true at once. She may genuinely miss you and not yet be in a position to choose you clearly. Recognizing that distinction isn't cynicism, it's clarity. And clarity is what protects both of you from re-entering something neither of you has actually prepared for. The boundary that matters here isn't punitive, it's honest. Not, "I'm going to make you work for it," but "I'm not available as a soft landing while the real decision is still unmade." That's not withholding, that's self-respect. And it's also, quietly, the most respectful thing you can offer her, because it forces the clarity that the gray zone actively prevents. Stop. Everything I just said, that's only half the picture. Because I've been describing her behavior, and if we stop there, you walk away with a framework for analyzing her. And that framework, however accurate, will not change anything. What changes things is turning the lens around. Repeat after me. My life doesn't require her permission to continue. Because there's something Montesquieu understood that changes everything. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Montesquieu spent years studying why governments succeed or fail in The Spirit of the Laws, and his central insight, the one that made him revolutionary, was this: sustainable systems are not built on force or fear or even love. They're built on structure, on clear, understood, mutually agreed upon principles that don't depend on any one person's mood or circumstance to function. Here's what that means for you. Principle 5. The period of no contact is not a strategy to get her back. It's a structure for getting yourself back. This is the reframe that changes everything, because every man I've watched go through this, the silence, the discipline of not reaching, the grinding discomfort of not knowing, treats it like a campaign, a plan whose end goal is her return. And that orientation, right there, is the problem. Max Weber identified 3 types of authority: traditional, based on custom; charismatic, based on personal force; and rational legal, based on clear structures everyone has agreed to follow. His insight was that charismatic authority, the most seductive kind, is also the most unstable. It depends entirely on continuous performance. The moment the performance falters, the authority collapses. You've been trying to perform your way back into her consideration, and it's exhausting because it's structurally unsustainable. What you need to build is something closer to Weber's 3rd type, a life with its own structure, its own internal logic, its own commitments that doesn't require her presence or absence to function. No contact, done right, isn't silence aimed at her, it's silence aimed at yourself. It's the act of stepping out of the orbit long enough to remember that you have your own gravity. Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more accurately understood as flourishing, the full activation of your capacities, cannot be accessed from a waiting room. A life organized around whether or not she texts back is not a life in full operation. It's a life on hold. The goal of this period isn't to make her miss you, it's to make yourself real to yourself again. Principle 6. Self-reflection after a relationship ends is not self-blame, it's self-authorship. Here's where most advice goes wrong.
Work on yourself sounds empowering, but it's often just repackaged desperation. Work on yourself so she comes back. Improve so she notices. Become better so she chooses you. That's still organizing your inner life around her verdict. Guicciardini, Machiavelli's sharpest contemporary, wrote in his private notebooks, the Ricordi, that the appearance of progress is not its substance, that people can feel the difference between genuine change and performance, and more importantly, you can feel the difference. Genuine self-reflection asks genuinely uncomfortable questions, not what did I do wrong so I can correct it for her, but who did I become in that relationship, and is that who I want to be? Not how can I be what she needs, but what do I actually need, and was I ever honest about it? Those questions take longer. They don't produce results you can display on a timeline, but they produce a different person, not a better performing version of the same one. And a genuinely different person makes a different relationship possible. Not necessarily with her, with someone, with a version of partnership that doesn't require the cycle to keep turning. These patterns, the attachment dynamics, the scarcity response, the reconciliation cycle, they operate across all relationships, regardless of who walked and who stayed. What we're examining isn't unique to her or to you. It's human, which means understanding it gives you something portable, clarity you can carry into every relationship going forward. Principle 7. If she comes back to a man who has genuinely moved, everything changes. If she comes back to a man who is waiting, nothing does.
Caesar Borgia, Machiavelli's complicated study in effective leadership in The Prince, has been misread for 5 centuries as a celebration of ruthlessness. It wasn't. What Machiavelli actually observed in Borgia was self-possession, the quality of acting from internal sufficiency rather than external need, of not organizing his decisions around the approval or presence of others. You don't need Borgia's ruthlessness, but that quality, genuine self-possession, a life with its own direction and weight, that's worth understanding, not as a tactic to seem more attractive, as a way of being that makes you, fundamentally, a more complete person. Because here's the final truth, and it's the one worth staying for. If she comes back and finds that man, the one who moved, who built, who became, the dynamic is genuinely different. Not because you executed a strategy, because you're actually different. And a different dynamic can produce a different outcome. But if she comes back and finds a man who was simply waiting, she'll know immediately. And the cycle continues. Polybius's Anacyclosis, the same rotation, different calendar year. Machiavelli saw the game. Hobbes built the theory of why humans play it. Rousseau asked whether the game was worth playing at all. Montesquieu designed the structures that make sustainable systems possible. Weber gave us the language for why authority either holds or collapses. And Aristotle, oldest of all of them, asked the question underneath all of it. What does it mean to live well? Not to win, not to get her back, not to prove something. To live well. You came into this conversation confused, probably a little hopeful in a way that felt almost shameful, wondering if the text meant something, wondering what move to make. Now you see the actual architecture, the attachment wiring, the loss recognition response, the reconciliation cycle, the signals that look mixed but usually aren't, and, most importantly, the only response that actually breaks the pattern. Become someone who isn't playing the game anymore. Not because you've given up on connection, but because you've chosen something larger than one person's returning attention as the measure of your worth. If this shifted something in you, if somewhere in the last 20 minutes you felt that quiet click of recognition, this isn't meant to stay with just you. There's someone in your life right now sitting in the same confusion, running the same loop, waiting for a text that may or may not come. Share this with them, not as advice, as company. Like it if it landed. Subscribe because what we've covered today is the foundation, and there's an entire architecture above it that most people never get to see.
Machiavelli wrote, near the end of his life, that fortune is like a river in flood. You cannot stop it. But the man who prepared the embankments before the flood came, that man decides where the water goes. Prepare the embankments.